All right, we'll begin. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's session. Today we'll be talking about hiring in the UAE and KSA, what every business owner should know in 2025. I'm excited to walk you through some key rules, processes, and pitfalls that you need to be aware of when hiring specifically in this region. So let's get started. I'll do a quick introduction before we begin. So my name is Anush. I am the HR manager at Safari Star. Over the years, I've worked closely with founders and business leaders across the Gulf, helping them navigate HR compliance, visa sponsorship, and nationalization requirements. So if you've ever wondered, do I need to hire nationals? Can I sponsor employees directly? What happens if I need to terminate someone? You're in the right place. Before we jump into the technical details, let me quickly introduce the company that I represent as well. So at Safari Star, we support businesses with everything from accounting, VAT compliance and tax, to business setup and global banking solutions. With over 15 years of experience and global presence, including in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, China, Europe, and the US, our focus has always been helping businesses grow while staying compliant. That expertise is what I'm drawing on today. So let's look into what we'll be covering in this session. So what we'll be covering this afternoon is we'll begin with mainland versus free zone hiring, followed by employment contracts in 2025. Then we'll move on to visa sponsorship processes and practical tips, nationalization policies, best practices for ending employment, top hiring mistakes to avoid, and then closing off with closing thoughts and live Q&A. So we can begin with the very first and most critical decision, which is choosing whether you should proceed with mainland or free zone. So this is going to be one of your biggest decisions you'll make as a business owner, whether you want to either proceed with mainland or free zone. This choice affects your hiring strategy, it affects your visa sponsorship, and it also comes with different compliance obligations. This decision is like choosing between coffee and tea. Both get the job done, but the experience is totally different. So for mainland companies, they operate under UAE federal laws regulated by Mahri. That means you can conduct business anywhere in the UAE. You sponsor employee visas directly through Mahri. You must comply with federal employment regulations, including Emiratisation quotas. The advantages are significant: unrestricted market across all Emirates, eligibility for government contracts, and a broader hiring pool. But that's only one side of the coin. So let's compare it against free zones. Free zone companies, on the other hand, operate under their respective free zone authorities. So what that means is that they usually offer faster and simpler setup processes. They have 100% foreign ownership, and the visa sponsorship and contracts are handled within the free zone framework. But there are limits when it comes to free zone. Employees are often restricted to work within the zone, and free zone companies can't trade directly on the mainland without a local agent. So your setup decision will directly shape your HR and compliance strategy. Once you've chosen your setup, the next step is drafting the right type of contracts. So let's talk about employment contracts. This is an area where laws in the UAE as well as Saudi Arabia differ. In the UAE, unlimited contracts are no longer allowed since February 2022. All employment contracts must be fixed term up to 3 years renewable. Whereas in Saudi Arabia, unlimited contracts and fixed term contracts are both valid. So for expats, contracts are usually fixed term and tied to their visa. However, for Saudi nationals, if no term is specified, that means that the contract is unlimited. So while the UAE does enforce fixed term across the board, KSA does offer more flexibility when it comes to employment contracts. But overall, the moral of the story is that you always need to write down your contract properly, both in Arabic and English. A WhatsApp voice note saying you're hired does not count. So usually the next hurdle for business owners is visa sponsorships, which is a very crucial part of the hiring process. So diving a little bit into the details, in both UAE and KSA, hiring means sponsoring someone's right to live and to work, which includes getting job titles approved so that they match your business license, completing medical tests and issuing Emirates ID in the UAE or IQAMAs in Saudi Arabia, managing quotas and dealing with processing delays. However, just to note, in Saudi Arabia, there is an additional process called the block visa approval step, which usually takes time. So whenever you're recruiting or hiring in KSA, you need to make sure that you give a 2 to 6 weeks buffer for this process. An additional note would be to always remember, if your license is IT services, don't try to sneak in a chef title because the system will catch you and it will reject your request. So now that the visas are sorted, businesses often forget one key area, which is very impactful, which is nationalization. So let's talk about Emiratisation and Saudization, because these policies are no longer optional in both countries. So in the UAE, companies with 20 to 49 employees must hire one Emirati by the end of 2024. And within this year, they've updated the law and they've mentioned that 2 need to be hired by the end of 2025 if your employees are from 20 to 49. However, for companies that have 50 or more skilled employees, they're tiered down to a system where one Emirati at 50 staff, 2 at 100, 3 at 150, and thereafter 1 for every additional 50 skilled worker. Non-compliance can cost you up to 96,000 dirhams per missing hire, and those fines only increase over time. So planning for amortization is not just a good practice, but it is legally required now. In Saudi Arabia, Saudization works differently. Your required percentage of Saudi national depends on your industry and company size. Failing to meet these quotas can result in losing access to new visas or facing significant fines. Mainly, the bottom line is you need to build these requirements into your workforce when planning from the very beginning. Now let's move on to another difficult and tricky area, which is ending employment. Okay, let's look at what happens when an employee leaves or when you need to end their employment. In the UAE, notice period must be between 30 and 90 days, depending on the contract. End of service benefits are usually calculated as per 21 days of basic pay per year of service for the first 5 years and 30 days per year thereafter. These benefits must be settled promptly to avoid labor disputes, and Saudi Arabia has very similar but slightly different calculation. So for Saudi Arabia, the calculation is half a month's salary per year of service for the first 5 years and 1 full month per year after that. As in the UAE, late or incorrect payments can land you in labor court, so compliance is very essential when it comes to this. And many of these issues happen because businesses fall into common traps. So let's look at the frequent mistakes that I see business owners make. So we'll go through the frequent hiring mistakes as well as the solutions that we could provide for each. So one of the hiring mistakes that I always see is hiring before your license or visa quota is approved. You always need to confirm that your license covers the job activity and the quota approvals are in place before issuing any offer to any employee. Building recruitment timelines around these approvals to avoid delay will really help you in the future. The other mistake that I've noticed is using outdated or non-localized contract templates. So you always need to make sure that your contracts are updated with the latest labor laws and always bilingual. So they need to always be in Arabic and English, as Arabic is the governing language for both UAE and KSA. You also need to review the templates annually to keep them compliant. As we know, laws can always change, so you always need to make sure that your contract is compliant with the labor law. Mistake number 3 is assuming nationalization doesn't apply to you. Checking your quota obligations as soon as you register your company. Integrate national hiring into your workforce plan early rather than treating it as a last-minute compliance issue. Then the other mistake that I've noticed is forgetting onboarding costs. I think this is super common. Sometimes you forget to realistically budget for mandatory costs, but some of the mandatory costs I can think of is health insurance, WPS registration, housing allowance, and flight tickets. So you always need to make sure you factor these costs in your cost per hire calculations before recruiting every employee. And the fifth mistake we've mentioned here is not formalizing freelance or remote work arrangements. Even for flexible workers, use written contracts. Define scope, payment terms, and responsibilities clearly. This protects you and the worker. Sometimes I see a lot of business owners forget this because since they're not technically under the company's visa, they feel that a contract is not necessary. However, that's not the case. In all cases, a contract must be there between you, a freelancer, and any employee for your company. So overall, a little structure up front, checking quotas, updating templates, budgeting properly saves a lot of money and keeps you on the right side of the law. So to wrap it up, hiring in the UAE and Saudi isn't just about HR. It's about survival. The laws are constantly evolving. Systems are digital and compliance is getting stricter every year. So don't think of this as red tape. Think of it as building a stronger foundation for your business and maybe saving yourself angry calls from your employees in the middle of the night. So we'll move on to the live Q&A. I hope I gave you guys clarity on mainly what business owners should know, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. We can take a few time for you. So I did see a question about whether amortization fines can be reduced or waived. Unfortunately, they can't be. Once you are fined by the government, these fines cannot be reduced or waived as you were already found non-compliant. Okay, so the next question is if an employee resigns before a year, do they get end of service benefits? So no, if the employee has not completed 1 year, then they're not eligible for any sort of end of service benefits. Yes, you can switch from free zone to mainland. However, that means you have to completely create a new license of mainland. You can't just switch it. You have to close your free zone and then move to a mainland after. Are there any scenarios where end of service benefits can be removed? Yes, there are many. In KSA, we have Article 80, meaning if the employee breached any sort of confidentiality, if there was anything including embezzlement, any sort of multiple warnings when it came to their performance, and you still notice that their performance was not going good, you can terminate them based on Article 80, which means that they will not be entitled to any end of service benefit. Similar to UAE, if the employees found any case of embezzlement, anything like that, at that moment as well, end of service benefits will be removed. Okay. So my problem, and I think my accounts have been blocked. Can I pay salaries in cash instead of WPS in the UAE? Actually, that's illegal. So all payments for salaries need to go through WPS. There's no possibility of you providing it in cash to the employee. Again, this is for the safety of the employer as well as the employee because it needs to go through the WPS file to be recorded properly. Okay, if I'll give 5 more minutes if there's any other questions that anyone might have. Okay, all right. I think there's no more questions. So thank you so much for joining today. And I will, if there are any additional questions that you might require, you can always contact me on LinkedIn. I can share it with you guys in the comments so that if you do have any additional questions that maybe I didn't get to, you can come to me and we can discuss and try to help you to my best abilities. Thank you so much, guys. See you next time.